and welcome to webinar number 5 in American English Live, Series 22. We're so happy that each of you are here with us today. My name is Dr. Darlene Wiggins-Dockery, and I will be with you today along with our moderator behind the scene, my colleague, Elena, who will be helping to answer your questions and responding to your comments in the chat. We wanted to let you know that our webinar will be recorded. And so if you put comments in the chat, these could be included in our webinar. So by participating, you are consenting to your comments being shared through American English Live, U.S. Department of State, and FHI 360. So if you do not want to have your name, your country, or your comments in the recording, please do not put them in the chat. Throughout Series 22, we are exploring a variety of strategies for fostering student motivation and engagement in the English language classroom. We hope you'll be able to use the strategies that we're sharing. So here's what you can expect today. The webinar is about 60 minutes long, and the presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really want to hear from you, our audience, so that we can respond to your ideas and to your experiences and learn from them as well. So please share your thoughts in the comments feature or the chat box. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a short attendance quiz available for you to have the chance to earn a digital badge. More details about that will be presented later in the webinar. Now for today's webinar, reading at the edge of your seat, motivation and the prescribed literacy curriculum. In 1906, author O. Henry published a collection of short stories about everyday people, reflecting the idea that everyone is worthy of noticing and writing about. One of these stories, after 20 years, ends with an unexpected twist. While O. Henry is celebrated for his surprise endings, traditional prose can feel inaccessible to many students. Using After 20 Years as an anchor text, the webinar will illustrate how directed reading thinking activity, or DRTA, can foster motivation around the prescribed literacy curriculum. By encouraging students to predict and reflect on what might happen, then read to see if they were correct. This approach makes the story come alive. The session will also explore ways to use DRTA as a motivational tool across grade levels and context. And so now we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Spencer Salas. Spencer is a professor of TESOL in the Department of Middle, Secondary, and K-12 Education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. An award-winning District of Columbia Public School ESL teacher, he has been a Fulbright Fellow to Romania, Guatemala, and South Africa, and a Senior English Language Fellow to Peru. In 2021, Spencer was honored by the U.S. Department of State for his contributions to U.S. foreign policy through TESOL. He writes for a variety of audiences, including a monthly blog for TESOL International. He is co editor of Vygotsky in the 21st Century Society, U.S. Latinos and Education Policy, Education in the New Latino South, and the TESOL Encyclopedia of English Language Teaching, first edition. Welcome, Spencer.
Well, thank you so much, Darlene, and welcome everybody, and welcome to Reading at the Edge of Your Seat, Motivation and the Prescribed Literacy Curriculum. It's springtime here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm so happy to be with all of you today. I'll start by thanking Dr. Darlene Wiggins, Dockery, for hosting me, and I'd like also to thank all of our colleagues at the U.S. Department of State's Office of English Language Programs for making this webinar and the AE series possible. Here's a shout out to our friends at FHI 360 for all the work they've done to prepare this session. And in particular, I'd like to recognize Javid, Elena, and Brooke for all the work they did to get it ready. And thanks to all of you for joining me. So in terms of an agenda, today we'll take up a classic American short story after 20 years to illustrate the directed reading thinking activity, DRTA for short. And I'd like to illustrate how we can use DRTA to read, predict, and repair. And finally, let's think about how we might extend the activity across grade levels and instructional contexts. Well, I'll tell you what, great books are national treasures, and we celebrate the authors who wrote them. They're a source of pride. And there's a popular expression in urban youth culture these days, before anyone else, or BAE for short. It means someone or something is your favorite. You're my BAE, right? She's my BAE, he's my BAE. So here's a question for all of you. In terms of writers, who's your before anyone else? Who's your BAE? Darling, what do you think? Who's your BAE?
You know, Spencer, you already taught me something because I thought "bay" was short for baby. so, so that's something new for me. My "bay" as an author, though, would have to be Toni Morrison. I have always been an avid reader, but she was the first author where I felt truly seen and understood. And her writing is just lyrical poetry. So, yes, it would have to be Toni Morrison.
That's awesome. Well, let's see what everybody else thinks.
Okay, let's see. We have some responses coming in. We have Nabil who said, "My bay is Mark Twain." And then we heard from Joma who said, "My bay is Joel Osteen." And then we heard from Joma, who also liked the term "bay." Maggie said, "Oh, Henry." Cassie said, "My bay is Charles Dickens." And then Avril has said that mine is Frederick Blackman. And Malika said, Emily Bronte. So those are some of the answers, varied in their different styles as writers, for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, there are a lot of writers that we can be proud of, and one of them is O. Henry, for sure. He's an American author, was best known for his short stories, often with surprise endings. And he was so good at what he did that there's an annual prize named in his honor. So since 1919, the O. Henry Award has recognized exceptional short stories published in the USA and Canada. So all this is to say, even if O. Henry isn't your bae, we can all recognize that he's an important American author, and his short stories often appear in the prescribed curriculum at the secondary level. One of those stories is After 20 Years. So in 1892, the New York Times came out with a list of who's who, arguing that there were only 400 fabulous individuals worth knowing in the entire city. In response, O. Henry published a collection of short stories entitled The 4,000,000, and his idea was that every single one of Manhattan's 4,000,000 residents was worthy of noticing. They all had their own stories. So After 20 Years comes from this same collection, and you can access it free of charge on the AE website. Well, I think as teachers, we can all agree that we love reading, right? And reading literature in the secondary classroom is an old tradition. That said, even if O. Henry's short stories are short, they can be challenging for our students. After 20 Years was written more than 100 years ago, so there's a century's distance between our reality and the story itself. Also, the vocabulary, grammar, syntax, these can all be dated and inaccessible. But even more for a lot of our students, I hate to say it, it's a why should I care challenge, right? It's an issue of motivation. So here's another question I'd like to ask all of you. Um, on a scale of 1 to 5, how motivated are your students to read classic American literature? So 1 would be not at all motivated, 2 would be barely motivated, 3 is somewhere in between, 4 is motivated, and 5 is super motivated. What do you all think? Let's see what kind of
Oh,
numbers.
okay. So we have a lot of numbers popping in, Spencer. Looks like a lot of threes. I see some twos and some ones in there as well. I see another two with a comment from Barbara Core who says two, barely motivated. And then Henta said four. I'm sorry, Henna says four, depends on the author and the writer. Then we see another one of our participants says 3 and 4. I see a 5 as well. So we are have quite a range.
All right. Well, the truth is, reading's complicated. And here's a great quote from Fontes and Pinnell. They wrote that reading is far more than looking at individual words and saying them. Readers are in the fortunate position of encountering language that is created mostly by unknown individuals who may be distant in space and time. The systems of strategic actions take place simultaneously in the brain during the complex process of reading. The proficient reader develops a network like a computer, only thousands of times faster and more complex. But for the reading computer to work, readers need to be motivated to make meaning. And that's where we have to get creative as teachers, especially if our adolescent readers are more at the 1 or 2 or even 3 level. Right? We've got to get them excited about reading and about what we have to read to meet the demands of the prescribed literacy curriculum. Well, as our students get older and move through school, there's less of an emphasis on teaching strategies for reading, reading strategies. And there's much more emphasis on what they're reading, the content. And I think it's safe to say that TESOL professionals at the secondary level often enter the profession with a background in linguistics or literature and not necessarily in literacy education. So we can learn a lot from our primary school colleagues, from what they do in their classrooms with texts. Even though DRTA has been around for a long time, I actually had never heard of it until I began working with elementary school teachers. But I recognized what it was because I had experienced it. That's the way I had been taught to read. So I remember back in the day when I was a little boy, sitting with my 8-year-old classmates in a circle on the floor while our teacher read an illustrated book aloud to the class from her chair. So she'd begin by sharing the cover of the book and its title and asking us questions about what we thought the reading would be about. As she read the story, she would stop from time to time to ask us to explain what we had heard and what we thought would come next. Then she'd read on to see if our predictions were on target or if we needed to readjust them. When we guessed it right, we were excited. When we got it wrong, we'd look back at the story and fix our predictions. So it was like a game. And now I realize, you know, 50 years later, that my teacher was using the directed reading thinking activity, or DRTA for short. So DRTA is one of many, many strategies we can use to motivate our students, and I'm going to focus on that one today. But here's another question for you. Besides DRTA, what strategies do you use to motivate students to read or engage with text? What do you all think?
And you all know this is one of the most exciting and important parts of our webinars is hearing from you. So we want to
Yeah.
know, what strategies do you use to motivate students to read and engage with text? And while those responses are coming in, Spencer, I have some comments I'd like to share with you.
Okay.
We've heard from Juan Pablo, who said, to be honest, in my case, my students are not motivated. So Juan Pablo, I think, is in the right place today to get some tips. And then we heard from Shazia, who said, I love to read O. Henry stories, especially The Gift.
Yeah.
I think The Gift of the Magi.
Yes.
Uh,
Good.
so those are some comments. And now we have some responses to the question, what strategies do you use to motivate students to read, engage with text? We heard from Rekha, who said, usually try to choose topics that they are interested in.
Yeah.
Juan Pablo said brainstorming before the reading. Sama said jigsaw. Cassie said questions related to their personal experience. McGarty said celebrating logical inferences. And then we heard from Nazrinchik, who said, I try to use Literature Corner, some adapted stories, but not all the students like to read.
Yeah.
So those are some of our responses. That one more just came in, use visual aids to help motivate my students. So thank you all for your comments. Back to you, Spencer.
Well, there are a lot of strategies we can turn to, and the one I'd like to look at today, again, is called the Directed Reading Thinking Activity, or DRTA. It's credited to Stauffer and it's been around since 1969. And it's one of the many guided reading strategies that frames reading as an active and thoughtful process that engages readers' prior knowledge about other texts and life, and that encourages readers to check and repair their understanding of what they're reading as they're reading. So, how do you get started? Um, the first step would be to select a story from the prescribed literacy curriculum, for example, but it should be a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, as opposed to a nonfiction narrative or text. And as the teacher, you're going to first preview the story and identify multiple points in the storyline, in the plot line, where you're going to stop reading and ask students to make predictions. You're going to prompt them to guess what's going to happen next. So as you read, step 3 would be as you read the story, you begin reading the story, you stop to confirm that your students' predictions were accurate. And if they weren't accurate, you ask students to repair their previous predictions and to make new ones. So it's a combination of predicting, reading, and repairing. So these are the 3 moves, and we could also frame it as 3 questions. So predict, what's going to happen? Read, was I right? Repair, or do I need to adjust my prediction? So these 3 moves are repeated again and again across the entire reading, and the teacher is going to stop the reading to ask the students, okay, what's your prediction? What was your prediction? Did you get it right? How'd you figure it out? Now, what do you think is going to happen? So DRTA often begins with the title of the story, and we simply ask the readers, what do you think the story is going to be about? What's your prediction? So let's try it out with everybody. For those of you who haven't read it, right? Based on the title, after 20 years, what do you think the story is going to be about and why?
Okay, so let's get your predictions. After 20 years, what could this story be about? While those responses are coming in, Spencer, I have a comment for you from Wilbur, who says DRTA is very interesting when it comes to the concept of reading.
Yeah.
And then Memching said DRTA is very useful. So we have some participants who are familiar with it and will leave here probably with some more tools for their toolbox. Now, in response to the prediction, Avril said, a story covering 20 years. That's the prediction. Cassie said, maybe it's about a big change in somebody's life within 20 years. And then we have another participant who said, maybe about friends from school. Not, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. Narjiz said, about someone who has been left on an island for 20 years. Oh, that would be an interesting story. Okay. Sama said what the future will be about after 20 years. So those are some predictions. Back to you, Spencer.
Well, we'll find out soon enough, right? Let's see. And here's the thing about predictions as a teacher, when you're asking students to make predictions, resist evaluating the student's response as correct or incorrect or good or bad. But I think a better way to approach the predictions is to ask them to explain their predictions with a question like, well, what makes you think that? Or some sort of similar prompt. So here, students are already activating their lived experience to make meaning even before the reading begins, and or they're activating their prior knowledge of text. And when I say text, it could be a song, film, poetry, prose, and so forth. So after the initial predictions about the title, and we're still not sure what it's about yet, but we have some guesses. The teacher's going to go ahead and begin reading the story. So let's try it out and let's see who got it right.
Okay.
So this is the beginning of the story, right? It's just 3 or 4 pages long. The cop, here I want to stop and say, cop is another word for policeman, right? It's an old-fashioned word for policeman. We still use it today, but it's not that common. The cop moved along the street looking strong and important. This was the way he always moved. He was not thinking of how he looked. There were few people on the street. There were few people on the street to see him. It was only about 10 at night, but it was cold, and there was a wind with a little rain in it. He stopped at doors as he walked along, trying each door to be sure that it was closed for the night. Then the cop suddenly slowed his walk. Near the door of a darkened shop, a man was standing. As the cop walked toward him, the man spoke quickly. Okay, so what's going to happen next? And why do you think so? And the teacher asks those questions and then moves on. So you stop, ask students to make predictions. Um, for example, when the cop notices the man standing in the doorway, at least for me, I tense up, right, as a reader, because I'm anticipating something's going to happen. And the question I ask myself is, why is this strange man standing near the door of a darkened shop? It's already 10 p.m., right? And that's an odd place to be all by yourself. It's cold, it's raining. And the waiting man begins speaking quickly, but what is he going to say? What will he do? What will the cop do? What makes you think so? What clues does the author provide about the direction of the story? So, Darlene, if it's okay with you, let's try this out together and then with everybody else. So, here's my question, Darlene. What do you think the
Okay.
man is doing near the door of the darkened shop at 10 p.m. on a cold and rainy night? And what do you think he's going to say to the policeman?
Um, well, it seems like he's in some kind of trouble.
Yeah.
Maybe he's hiding from someone, and he probably will tell the policeman he's lost if a police, because that does look suspicious, just lurking around a door at that time of night.
Yeah, it could be, Darlene. But what makes you think that exactly? So he's alone. It's nighttime.
Well, what made me think it is, well, the fact of the lateness of the night.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, it's a deserted, I got the sense it might be a deserted alley, or something like that. And so that's what made me think that either he's lost or hiding, or, there's some kind of mm, unusual reason he would be in that spot. But I don't know exactly for sure. I'm thinking he's in some sort of trouble and that he's afraid the policeman is going to catch him.
Well, let's see. Let's read it again, and thank you, Darlene, for your predictions. And then let's see what everybody else thinks. So let's read it one more time. The cop moved along the street, looking strong and important. This was the way he always moved. He was not thinking of how he looked. There were few people on the street to see him. It was only about 10 at night, but it was cold, and there was a wind with a little rain in it. He stopped at the doors as he walked along, trying each door to be sure that it was closed for the night. Then the cop suddenly slowed his walk. Near the door of a darkened shop, a man was standing. As the cop walked toward him, the man spoke quickly. So Darlene shared her predictions, and now it's your turn, teachers. Why is the waiting man waiting? And for what? And what's he going to tell the cop, the policeman? What do you
Okay.
think?
Oh, I'm sorry, Spencer. I didn't mean to talk over you. I just got excited when I saw some of the comments had already started coming in. Um, that One comment is he's attempting to break in and steal.
Yeah.
That's from Valentine. Then Nazarichik said, probably there is some crime committed. So yes, in the rain. Why would someone be walking around in the rain in a dark night late? That makes me think that too. Rika, he was looking for the cop and needed help. That's another
Mhm.
idea. Reg said he was waiting for someone. April said he did a crime.
Mhm.
So those are some of the responses we've received. And then some more coming in. Laura said he doesn't remember how he got there and he's lost. Edward said it's cold. He is alone. 10 almost is late in the night, and it's strange that he's still standing there late in the night. And he might have had happened upon an unfortunate accident. Malika said he is not from that town and he's on a journey. And then we heard from Farida, who said he might have an urgent problem. Excuse me. So those are some of the responses we've received. Those are the guesses. So let's see what happens.
Well, I'm excited about these predictions. And now let's read and let's see what happens. So the story continues. It's all right, officer, he said. I'm waiting for a friend. 20 years ago tonight, said the man, I had dinner here with Jimmy Wells. He was my best friend and the best fellow in the world. He and I grew up together here in New York like two brothers. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning, I was to start for the West. I was going to find a job and make a great success. You couldn't have pulled Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. We agreed that night that we would meet here again in 20 years. We thought that in 20 years we would know what kind of men we were and what future waited for us. So at this point in the story, we learn why the waiting man is waiting for his friend. So he and Jimmy promised to reunite at that same spot and time 20 years later. So now we understand the title, right? If a student or students got that initial prediction about the title right, so we'd ask them how did you figure it out? But if the prediction or predictions were off the mark about the title or what the man was going to say, we'd go back and repair the prediction. Were there any clues in the story that might have helped us predict more accurately? Were there others that we missed? Are there new ones? Right? So, Darlene, if you don't mind, let's try modeling this a little bit.
Okay.
And tell me, what was your original prediction about the title? Was it right? Did you guess it right?
I did not really. Now that I know that it's going to be a reunion between friends, my thinking about what was going to happen in the story has changed.
So now that how so? What do you think's going to happen now that you know what after 20 years is all about?
I hope he meets his friend, Jimmy Wells. I hope his friend is coming, but there's still something a little ominous
Yeah.
about the setting, about it being dark, about it being rainy, and it being late, and this person still being outside during this time. I mean, it makes me wonder, why didn't they plan to meet inside a restaurant or inside someplace? So yeah, it still makes me feel a little ominous.
So there's some clues that the author's giving that maybe you feel something's going to happen.
Hmm.
Well, could be, right? Let's keep reading to find out. So the story continues. Have you heard from your friend since you went west? Yes, for a time we did write to each other, said the man. But after a year or two, we stopped. But I know that Jimmy will meet me here if he can. He was as true as any man in the world. He'll never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand here tonight, but I'll be glad about that if my old friend comes too. The waiting man took out a fine watch covered with small jewels. 3 minutes before 10, he said. It was 10 that night when we said goodbye here at the restaurant door. So details matter and can help us make predictions. And here's some things that I noticed and that I'm asking myself. For example, what's the significance of the fine watch covered with small jewels that the waiting man takes out of his vest to check the time? Why did O. Henry include that? And again, the question is, why is it raining and dark and cold? So what do these details suggest, right? And maybe how do these details help you make better predictions or start predicting what's going to happen next? Well, let's find out what everybody's thinking. Will Jimmy Wells show up? That's the question of the hour, right?
So what do you think? Will Jimmy Wells show up? Let's see. What do you think? Let's see. As these responses are coming in, I have a comment for you, Spencer. It's from April, who says, wow, with a lot of O's. It says, the story is very nice. And then we are getting some predictions. Nasima has a response to your question about the watch. What was the significance of the watch? Nasima says maybe the watch is a present from this friend.
Oh,
Then we heard from Aniha, who said, uh, who predicts, yes, he will show up. Jessam says maybe he will show up. And let's see, we heard from Nabil, who says yes, and Baborkar, who says, of course, yes. We also heard from Mam Ching, who says, such a good story about friendship and commitment. Valentine says, not quite sure. Joma says, I suspect that Jimmy will not show up.
oh.
They haven't heard from each other in a year or two. Then Mari says, the watch represents that time is precious.
Mm, I
Interesting.
like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So those are some responses that we've received. Back to you, Spencer.
Well, let's keep reading to find out what happens. So the story continues. About 20 minutes he waited, and then a tall man in a long coat came hurrying across the street. He went directly to the waiting man. Is that you, Bob? He asked doubtfully. Is that you, Jimmy Wells? Cried the man at the door. The new man took the other man's hands in his. The two men started along the street, arm in arm. The man from the west was beginning to tell the story of his life. The other, with his coat up to his ears, listened with interest. At the corner stood a shop bright with electric lights. When they came near, each turned to look at the other's face. The man from the west stopped suddenly and pulled his arm away. Okay, everybody, now we're going to find out what happens. So here's a spoiler alert, right? Wait for it. Wait for it. Here it comes. You're not Jimmy Wells, he said. 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change the shape of a man's nose. It sometimes changes a good man into a bad one, said the tall man. You've been under arrest for 10 minutes, Bob. Chicago cops thought you might be coming to New York. They told us to watch for you. Are you coming with me quietly? That's wise. But first, here is something I was asked to give you. You may read it here at the window. It's from a cop named Wells. The man from the west opened the little piece of paper. His hand began to shake a little as he read. Oh boy. Oh boy. What will the note say? Let's hear from everybody. So
Wow.
the man hands him a piece of paper. What's the note going to say?
Ooh, what do you all think the note's going to say? That really was a spoiler, and it really was a surprise that that wasn't his friend. But that's what O. Henry is good for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, let's see. We have some comments coming in. Set Jean Flores said, "This is so intriguing. I love it."
Mm,
Manuel said, "A very delightful story. I'm enjoying it." Okay, so let's see. Some of the other responses are Junuel says, "I think the lights represent something. Both of them are different kinds of light. The other one standing under the dark shop had an unfortunate life, while the
mm,
one standing in the light had a better life."
mm.
Then we heard from Gilbert, who says, regarding the note, "I don't know what it says. I love surprises." Nargis said, "That's the reason why my bay is O. Henry." So Nargis is loving this. Then we heard from Isabel, who says, "Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind," said the
Mm,
note.
mm.
So that's one of the responses. Graciela said, "It is going to say, 'This is the wrong suspect, man. Let him free.'" Then we heard from Junio, who said it is going to say, "Time changes everything."
Mm.
Michelle said it's going to say, "You have the right to remain silent."
Oh boy.
And then Maritier says, "Sorry, I can't meet you, but I remembered our meeting."
Mm.
And Donna V says, is also going to say, "I'm sorry." So those are some responses. Let's see. Wait, Betty said, "I'm eager to know." So Betty's waiting to find out what the answer is. And um, we have a comment, and the comment was, "This is so intriguing." So back to you, Spencer.
Okay, are you ready for it? What will the note say? Bob, I was at the place on time. I saw the face the man wanted by I saw the face of the man wanted by Chicago cops. I didn't want to arrest you myself, so I went and got another cop and sent him to do the job. Jimmy. Oh, wow. Now, that's the sort of ending, right, that made O. Henry famous. It turns out that the first policeman, and some of you guessed it right, I saw in the comments, the first policeman, the cop who was walking down the street, was Jimmy Wells. And Jimmy had come to meet that waiting man who we learned his name was Bob. So he had come to meet Bob like he promised he would. But once he realized that Bob was wanted by the Chicago police, he didn't have the heart to arrest him himself. So he left and he sent another policeman, the man, the tall man with the coat, to do the job. So wow, that's an O. Henry ending.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, some of you, were right on target with your predictions. So to recap, DRTA or directed reading thinking activity, it begins with a story. So you select a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, and it needs to be uh, fictional. Can't be a nonfiction narrative or an essay. So first, the teacher's gonna, after you select the story, you preview the story and you identify multiple points, just like we did in the plot line, where you're gonna stop the reading and prompt students, ask students to make predictions. So as you read the story aloud with your students, stop to confirm that their predictions were accurate, and or ask students to repair to correct their predictions and to make new ones. So DRTA, like we said, it's this combination of predict, read, and repair that you keep repeating this combination as you make your way through the beginning, middle, and end of the story. Like I said at the start of the webinar, DRTA was originally meant to be used for young readers and picture books. And that's how I learned to read. And it's still very much something that elementary school teachers do today. However, in this session, I've illustrated how we might also use DRTA with a classic American short story at the secondary level with adolescents. So remember, the strategy works best with fictional text, and the text could also be a film, right? So you could start showing a film and keep stopping it, have them predict, view, and repair, right? And the film could be a drama or a comedy. Here are some additional considerations. I think it's always good for the teacher to model uncertainty. It's helpful for teachers to model their predictions and then the repairs they might have to make based on how the story unfolds. So it's good for students to see that even a teacher can get the prediction wrong sometimes, right? Because the teacher's a reader just like anybody else. And as we predict and read, we might have to adjust our predictions and so we keep looking back at the text and then looking forward to what we think the text is going to be about. With DRTA, we also think about um, other stories we've read before, and we start to look for similarities and or differences with the story we're reading at the present time. So sometimes a story we've read before can give us clues about a story we're reading now. In other words, sometimes there's a pattern, and that's very true um, in American fiction, let's say, right? You start to notice a pattern. Let's say if it's a comedy, somebody's going to get married in the end, right? Or if it's a tragedy, somebody's going to die, right? So we start to notice a pattern and that's especially true in literature in English, right? So here's a question before we wrap up. I want to ask you, what did you all find most motivating about using DRTA with after 20 years? And how do you think your students will feel reading with DRTA?
Okay, so we want to hear from you. What do you find most motivating? And how do you think your students will feel reading with DRTA? While those responses are coming in, Spencer, I have some comments for you. We heard from April who said, "Gosh, I got it right. I was thinking Jimmy is the cop. This is crazy." Amaya said, "What an ending. 5 exclamation points, a laughy face, a sad face, and a broken heart all over the place." And then we heard from Bubba Core, who said, "An amazing story." Isabel said, "I'm so going to do this in my class." Azu said, "Thanks for this webinar. Very useful for reading lessons." And now we're getting some responses to what did you find most motivating about using DRTA with after 20 years? And how do you think your students will feel reading with DRTA? So we heard from Jessup, who said, "Excellent session. It facilitates how to motivate students to read and teach reading effectively and amazingly for all ages. Anna said students are challenged to predict the next story. Nabil says it's a nice way of motivating students and creativity. Daniel says the suspense. Juan Pablo says the students will remember forever the lesson because they were a part of it.
Yeah.
Notgiz said, I think if each lesson could be organized in a way that you showed us today, it would not only be interesting, but also enhance the speaking and thinking abilities. Kanul said it makes learners use their imagination. Noni says using prediction motivated students to read more and delve into details. I think that the students are going to love it. Babakur said it is a learner-centered activity. And Sevda said they can be creative. And we heard from Isabel, who says, I'm going to use this in my class. And that's exactly what we want. Back to you, Spencer.
Well, thanks for those thoughts. And one thing I can say is that DRTA has really stuck with me as a reader. And as I explained, even though I didn't know they were using DRTA at the time, from an early age, my teachers introduced me to reading using the directed reading thinking activity. So predicting, reading, and repairing are things that I've internalized, and they've become part of my reading computer. So the excitement that I felt when I read as a child, trying to guess what was going to happen next, is the same excitement I feel today as an adult when I'm reading and trying to figure out what will happen next. I also wanted to share a few things that I learned as I was preparing the webinar. And one of the things I learned was that O. Henry, his real name was William Sidney Porter, right? And he was born in 1862, actually in North Carolina, not far from Charlotte. And as a young man, he moved to Texas, where he started a family and a career with the First National Bank of Austin. But in 1895, he was charged with the federal crime of embezzlement. He stole money from the bank, sort of, not with a gun, sort of, he took money from the bank, and he was in the position to have access to it. So he fled to Honduras, actually, and he left his wife behind and their infant daughter. 6 months later, his wife contracted tuberculosis. So he returned and his wife died. And Porter went to prison for 3 years, where he began writing the stories for which he is famous under the fictitious name or alias of O. Henry. In After 20 Years, The Waiting Man, Bob explains that his friendship with Jimmy Wells meant the world to him even after 20 years. So he kept his promise and he returned. And it makes me think that maybe O. Henry had made a similar promise to his wife when he left for Honduras as a fugitive. But he couldn't predict that she would die so suddenly, or that he'd go to prison, or that he'd become a famous writer. So keeping a promise to someone we hold dear may or may not change how our lives play out. But even after 20 years, we still remember that friendship and the promise of who we once were and the lives we were once able to imagine for ourselves. So in addition to the O. Henry collection, the AE, American English website, provides open access to Jack London's powerful short narratives about the 19th century gold rush in the Canadian Yukon. Readers will also find Stephen Crane's classic U.S. Civil War novella about a young soldier's emotional turmoil on the battlefield. Consider exploring these and other AE resources and applying the directed reading thinking activity to keep your students reading at the edge of their seats. And finally, here are some references for you. So thanks so much, everybody.
And thank you, Spencer, for demonstrating how the directed reading and thinking approach, DRTA, can help bring text to life, even inspire students when teachers are required to engage with the required reading curriculum. So thank you so much for that.